Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It really helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. I booked the cabin because I wanted quiet. November in the mountains felt like the right time to disappear for a few days. Fewer tourists, colder air, leaves already dead on the ground. The drive up from Asheville took longer than I expected because the roads narrowed and twisted, and my phone lost signal more than once. By the time I reached the gravel driveway, it was already dark, the kind of dark that feels heavy. The cabin sat back in the trees, small and plain, with a single porch light that buzzed faintly. Inside, everything smelled like old wood and cleaner. The place was neat but tired. Scratches on the table, a couch that dipped in the middle, a thin rug that didn't quite cover the floor. There were 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, and at the end of the short hallway, a solid door with no handle on my side. Just a deadbolt and a small sign screwed into the wood that said storage. I remembered the listing mentioning 1 locked storage room. I barely looked at it. Every rental had something like that. I unpacked slowly, cooked a basic dinner, and tried to relax. The cabin creaked constantly, the normal sounds of a place settling. Wind moved through the trees and brushed the roof. Nothing felt wrong, just lonely. I checked the locks twice before going to bed, not because I was scared, but because I was far from town, and that felt like the smart thing to do. I fell asleep easily, but the sleep was thin. The bed was too soft, and the silence wasn't complete. Around 2:17 a.m., I woke up without knowing why. My eyes opened, and I lay still listening. At first there was nothing. Then I heard it. A low, dull thud, spaced out slow. Not loud enough to be clear, but loud enough to be wrong. It sounded like someone hitting something with the flat of their hand. It wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't coming from the roof. It came from inside the cabin. I sat up and listened harder. The sound repeated, uneven, as if whatever was making it was tired. Thud. Pause. Thud. The direction was clear. It came from the hallway. From the locked door. My first thought was that it was the plumbing. That made no sense, but my brain wanted an answer that didn't involve anything else. I got out of bed and stood barefoot on the cold floor. The sound stopped. I waited. My heart slowed a little. I told myself it was just the cabin. Old places make strange noises. I turned the lights on. Every lamp, every overhead light. The cabin looked smaller and less friendly under bright light. I stood there for a long time, listening. Nothing. I walked down the hallway and stood in front of the locked door. Up close, it looked thicker than the others. The wood was scuffed near the bottom, but I assumed it was from moving boxes or furniture at some point. I put my hand against it. It was cold. There was no sound on the other side. I went back to bed, lights still on, and tried to sleep. I don't think I really did. My body rested, but my mind stayed alert. At some point, the lights felt too bright, so I turned off the ones in the kitchen and living room, leaving the hallway light on. The sound came back. Same rhythm. Same place. It wasn't loud, but it was steady now, like someone testing the wall. I stayed in bed this time. I counted the seconds between each thud. It wasn't random. There was intention behind it. I picked up my phone and messaged the host through the app, explaining the noise and the time. The message sent, but there was no reply. I checked the signal. Weak, but there. When I stood up again, the sound stopped instantly, like a switch had been flipped. That scared me more than if it had kept going. I turned the hallway light brighter and opened the bedroom door wider. I could hear my own breathing. Nothing else. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat on the couch with all the lights on and waited for morning. When the sky finally started to lighten, the cabin felt different. Less closed in. I walked back to the hallway and looked at the locked door again. In daylight, the marks were impossible to ignore. Deep grooves ran along the bottom edge, cutting into the wood. They weren't random. They were angled like fingernails or a small tool had dragged down and pulled. Some of the marks overlapped, as if whoever made them had tried again and again. I felt sick. I packed my things quickly, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. Before leaving, I took photos of the door, the scratches, the lock. I didn't open it. I didn't try to knock. I didn't want to give whatever was on the other side a reason to respond. I left the cabin before checkout time and drove straight into town, stopping only when I had full signal again. The host finally replied hours later. The message said that the room should not make noise unless someone was inside it. There was no explanation after that. No apology. No follow-up. I didn't go back. Instead, I reported what I found through the rental app and then to local authorities. I sent the photos. I explained the sounds, the timing, the locked door. They took it seriously. A few days later, I learned that the storage room wasn't just storage. It was a space that had once been used as a workshop, then sealed off. There was an exterior access point hidden behind the cabin, partially blocked by brush and old boards. Someone had been using it to get inside. They found signs that someone had been living there: a thin mattress on the floor, empty food containers, a flashlight with dying batteries. The inside of the door was covered in the same kind of marks I saw from the outside, only worse. Whoever it was had been trapped when the exterior access jammed. The noise I heard was someone trying to get out. When I turned on the lights, they must have stopped, afraid of being noticed. They never found the person. The best guess was that they escaped after I left, once the cabin was empty again. I think about that night often, about how close I was to opening that door, about how I slept in the same small space as someone I didn't know, separated by a few inches of wood and a lock that worked too well. The cabin is still listed online. The storage room is no longer mentioned. I stayed in a small studio in Kreuzberg for a week in March 2023. It was on a quiet side street, the kind with old trees that dropped dust on the parked cars and tram lines you could hear faintly if you listened hard enough. The building was older, with thick walls that kept the street noise out and kept smells in. The stairwell always smelled like cold stone, cleaning soap, and something metallic. My studio was on the third floor. One room, a narrow bathroom, a tiny kitchen strip along one wall, and a single window facing the back courtyard. I arrived late the first night, tired from traveling. I didn't explore much. I unpacked, showered, and went to sleep. The bed was placed so I could see the bathroom door if it was open. I usually sleep with doors cracked open, because I don't like closed spaces. The bathroom light switch was on the outside of the bathroom, next to the door frame. I noticed that because it felt backward, like someone had designed it in a rush. The first morning, I woke up before my alarm. I checked my phone. It was 6:41 a.m. The bathroom light was on. I remember noticing it in a flat, annoyed way, assuming I had left it on after showering the night before. I got up, turned it off, and went back to bed for another hour. The second morning, the same thing happened. I woke up, phone in hand, 6:41 a.m. again. The bathroom light was on. That time, it stuck with me longer. I was sure I had turned it off. I stood there in the doorway, looking at the switch, feeling stupid for standing still like that. Old apartments have wiring problems. Switches flip. I told myself that. I went on with my day. What made it worse was how exact the time was. I didn't notice it right away, but when I checked my phone later that day, I saw the alarm history. I had woken up naturally both mornings within a minute of 6:40. It wasn't the light waking me. It was my body, and the light was already on. The third morning, I didn't sleep properly. I lay on my side, facing the bathroom door, watching the dark gap under it. The room felt different at that hour. The city hadn't started yet. No trams, no voices, no cars. Just the low hum of electricity in the walls, and the distant sound of water pipes somewhere below. At exactly 6:40, the bathroom light turned on. There was a soft click, not loud, but clean and mechanical. The light spilled under the door and onto the floor, a thin yellow line. I didn't move. My heart started beating faster, but my body felt heavy, like it didn't want to react yet. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps. They were not inside my studio. They were in the hallway outside the apartment. The building had old wooden floors in the hall, and they creaked in certain places. These footsteps hit those places exactly. Slow, steady steps, not rushed, not hesitant. The sound moved from the stairwell toward my door, then past it. Whoever it was didn't stop. They walked like they knew the layout, like they had done it many times. I stayed in bed until the light turned off again. It took about 3 minutes. I counted by watching the seconds on my phone screen without unlocking it. When the light went off, the hallway was silent again. Later that day, I checked the bathroom carefully. The switch wasn't loose. The wiring looked old but normal. There was no motion sensor, no timer, nothing modern, just a basic switch. Over the next few days, I paid attention to everything. I noticed the lock on the apartment door was old too. One of those that can be opened quietly if you know how. I noticed faint scuff marks on the floor near the door, half covered by a rug. I noticed the bathroom mirror had tiny scratches at eye level that didn't match my height. Every morning, the same thing happened. 6:40 a.m. light on. Footsteps outside. Light off. I started sleeping with my phone recording audio. The recordings picked up the click, the light hum, and the footsteps. Always the same rhythm. Always the same length of time. Midweek, I contacted the host through the rental app. I didn't describe it as fear. I described it as a technical issue. The response came later that day. The host acknowledged that the previous tenant had lived there for 7 years and had a routine tied to the building. The message explained that the tenant had moved out but struggled to adjust and sometimes returned to the building out of habit. The host framed it as harmless, as muscle memory, as something that would stop eventually. I read the message multiple times. It didn't say the tenant no longer had a key. It didn't say the tenant was prevented from entering. It didn't say the bathroom light turning on was impossible. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the bed with the room lights off, staring at the door. I felt ridiculous and exposed at the same time. The apartment no longer felt neutral. It felt used. At 6:40, the light turned on again. This time, the footsteps stopped outside my door. They didn't try the handle. They didn't move for a long time. I could hear breathing, faint but real, on the other side. The sound was calm, patient. After a while, the footsteps moved on. The light turned off. I stayed frozen until my phone vibrated with the time change. That morning, I packed everything. Before leaving, I checked the hallway camera near the stairwell that I had noticed earlier in the week. It was unplugged. The cable hung loose against the wall, dusty at the end, like it had been that way for a long time. I left the key on the table and walked out without looking back. When I reached the street, the city was fully awake. People were biking to work. A bakery was opening down the block. Everything looked normal in a way that felt almost cruel. Later, after I was home, I looked up public records. I found the name of the previous tenant through old listings. I found his social media. His photos showed the same building entrance, taken over many years. Same angle. Same early morning light. Captions posted around the same time every day. In one photo, reflected in the glass behind him, I could see the hallway. And on the wall, near where my door would be, was the bathroom light glowing through the gap under the door. The post stopped the week after I left. I reported everything to the platform and to local authorities once I returned home, including the recordings and screenshots. I was told the matter would be handled. I never heard anything after that. What stays with me is how ordinary it all was. No threats. No confrontation. Just a routine that didn't belong to me, continuing as if I wasn't there at all. Every morning at 6:40, someone else lived their life through my walls, and I was just something in the way that week. I booked the place because it was cheap and close to where I needed to be the next morning. It was a small house in a quiet part of Phoenix, one of those neighborhoods where everything looks the same and the streets are wide and empty at night. The listing talked about privacy, easy self-check-in, and a keypad lock on the front door. That was a selling point for me. I liked not having to meet anyone. I arrived just before sunset, parked under a streetlight, and rolled my bag up the short concrete path to the door. The keypad worked right away. I typed the code, heard the normal beep, and the door unlocked. Inside, the house smelled clean in that sharp, chemical way, like it had just been wiped down. The air conditioner was already running, humming softly through the vents. I walked through every room like I always do when I stay somewhere new. One bedroom, one bathroom, a small kitchen, a living room with a couch that felt stiff and unused. The windows were closed and locked. The back door had a deadbolt and a simple handle lock. Everything seemed normal. I set my bag down in the bedroom and put my food in the fridge. I checked the lock again before I settled in. The keypad beeped the same way it had before, quick and confident. The deadbolt slid into place smoothly. I remember thinking how solid it felt. That detail stayed with me later. The evening passed quietly. I ate, watched some videos on my phone, charged my devices. Outside, the neighborhood stayed still. No loud cars, no people walking by. Just the distant sound of traffic far away and the steady AC. By 11:30 p.m., I was tired. I turned off the lights in the living room and kitchen and went to the bedroom. I left a small lamp on, the kind with a soft yellow glow. I lay on top of the covers for a while, scrolling, then finally put my phone down. At 11:58 p.m., the keypad beeped. It was a single beep at first, sharp and electronic, cutting through the quiet house. I sat up immediately. I knew that sound. It was the sound the lock made when a wrong number was pressed. A second later, it beeped again. I stayed completely still. My heart was already beating fast, but I didn't move. I listened. The house was quiet again for maybe 2 seconds. Then I heard the sound that made my stomach drop. The lock disengaged. The same mechanical click I had heard earlier when I unlocked it myself. I didn't think. I got out of bed and moved fast, barefoot on the tile. I reached the front door just as it was starting to open. I pushed it shut with both hands and threw the deadbolt closed. My hands were shaking so badly I almost missed the slot. I leaned my weight against the door for a moment, listening. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear breathing. Just the AC and my own pulse in my ears. I backed away slowly and locked the handle too, even though I knew the deadbolt was the stronger lock. I checked the windows again, touching each latch to make sure it was secure. Everything was locked. The back door was still closed. Nothing else had moved. I stood in the middle of the living room, not knowing what to do. I didn't want to turn on all the lights. I didn't want to go back to bed. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message had come in from the host. It explained that someone related to them might come by to pick something up, and that they had forgotten to mention it earlier. I read it over and over. The timing made no sense. The message came after the door had already unlocked. There was no apology, no detail, no question asking if it was okay. Just an explanation, like it was normal for someone else to come into the house I was renting without warning. I didn't respond. I sat on the couch with my back to the wall, facing the front door. I kept the lamp on. Every sound felt loud. The AC clicked on and off. The fridge made a low hum. I jumped at every small noise. I kept thinking about the keypad. Someone had tried a wrong code, and then the door had unlocked anyway. That meant they either had another working code or a physical override. It meant they were supposed to be able to get in. I didn't sleep. I lay there all night, sometimes on the couch, sometimes on the bed with my shoes on, staring at the ceiling. I checked the time constantly. Midnight passed. Then 1. Then 3. At some point, I heard something outside, maybe footsteps on gravel, maybe just my imagination. I held my breath and listened until my chest hurt. Morning light finally started to leak in through the blinds. The house looked different in daylight, smaller and less threatening, but my body still felt tight and exhausted. At 7 a.m., I got up for real. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. I walked into the kitchen to get water. That's when I saw the floor. There were shoe prints on the tile. Dark, muddy prints that went from the back door toward the center of the kitchen, then stopped. They weren't there the night before. I knew that because the floor had been clean, and because I hadn't gone near the back door after locking it. The prints were larger than my feet. They had a thick tread pattern like work boots. There was dried dirt along the edges, cracked and flaky, like it had been tracked in from outside and left to dry overnight. I stood there for a long time, just looking at them. I followed them with my eyes. They didn't go to the bedroom. They didn't go to the living room. They just came in, paused, and then turned back the way they came. I checked the back door. It was locked, but the deadbolt felt loose when I touched it, like it had been turned recently. I checked the front door again. Still locked. Nothing else in the house looked disturbed. My bag was untouched. My food was still there. But the prints were real. They were right in front of me. I took photos of everything. The door. The lock. The prints. I packed my bag as fast as I could without making noise, even though I was alone. I didn't shower. I didn't eat. I left the key code untouched. When I stepped outside, the sun was fully up, and the street looked peaceful. Neighbors were starting their day. Someone was watering their lawn. It felt wrong that everything looked so normal. Later, after I left, I looked up the host online. The name didn't match the property records. The house had been sold recently. I also realized something else that made my chest feel cold. The keypad log, which I had checked briefly before leaving, showed an entry at 12:03 a.m. It showed the door being unlocked from the outside. That meant someone had come back after I locked it. I never got another message. I didn't stay to find out who had been inside that house with me. I know now that the extra key wasn't an accident. It was part of how the place worked. And if I hadn't been awake at 11:58 p.m., I would have been asleep in that bedroom when the door opened all the way. The apartment was small in a way that felt planned, like every corner had been measured twice before anyone decided it was enough. White walls, pale wood floor, no dust anywhere. Even the air felt clean, the kind of clean that smells faintly like detergent and plastic. It was one of those short-term rentals you forget the moment you leave, which was exactly why I chose it. I had arrived in Kyoto late, tired from walking all day, my legs aching from stairs and temples and narrow streets that all looked the same after dark. The neighborhood was quiet, not empty, just calm. A vending machine glowed blue across the street. Somewhere far away, a train passed. Inside, everything worked. The lights were bright. The bed was stiff but neat. The bathroom was tiny, the kind where you can stand in one place and touch the sink, toilet, and shower without moving your feet. The mirror above the sink was spotless. No streaks, no fingerprints. It looked brand new. I unpacked slowly, trying not to rush because I knew I would not sleep right away. Jet lag always hit me late. I showered, let the hot water run longer than I needed, listening to it echo in the small room. When I turned it off, the silence felt sudden, like someone had closed a door in my head. At 1:12 a.m., according to my phone, I brushed my teeth. I remember the time because I checked it while the toothbrush buzzed in my mouth. The bathroom light was bright and even. My face looked tired but normal. Eyes red from the day. Hair still damp. Nothing felt off until I smiled. It was small at first. Just a habit. I smiled at myself without thinking. My reflection smiled back, but not at the same time. It was late. Not much, but enough to notice. A fraction of a second. Like a bad video call. I froze with the toothbrush still in my mouth. Foam slid down my lip. I stared at the mirror, heart starting to beat faster for no clear reason. I told myself it was just my eyes, that I was tired, that the light flickered or my brain did. I leaned closer. The glass was clean. No distortion. No cracks. I raised my hand slowly, watching closely. My reflection followed, but again late. Clear as day. My hand moved, then the hand in the mirror copied it after a short pause. Not long enough to be dramatic, just long enough to be wrong. I lowered my hand. The reflection lowered its hand after me. I tried again, faster this time. Same delay. I felt cold spread through my chest and arms, like I had stepped into shade after standing in the sun too long. My mouth was dry even with toothpaste still in it. I spat into the sink, watching the timing of everything. The sound was normal. The motion was not. I leaned back and blinked hard. I shook my head once. The reflection did the same, late. I turned my body sideways, then back. Late. I lifted my left hand, and then my right, one after the other. The reflection stayed behind me, always catching up, never matching. The logical part of my brain tried to take control. Mirrors do not lag. Screens lag. Cameras lag. I scanned the edges of the mirror. It was set into the wall, flush, no frame. But now that I looked closely, the surface felt too flat, too perfect. Not like glass. More like something covering something else. I reached out and touched it. Cold, smooth. No give. My breathing had gotten loud in the small room. I forced myself to slow it down. I told myself it could be some kind of smart mirror, some kind of screen. I had seen them in hotels. But even those did not lag like this, and there were no lights, no icons, no signs it was anything but a mirror. I stepped back and turned off the bathroom light. The reflection vanished. The room behind me was dark. I left the bathroom and shut the door. I remember the click of the latch. I stood in the main room for a second, listening. The apartment was silent again. I told myself to go to bed. I told myself I was overreacting. Then I noticed the light under the bathroom door. A thin white line cut across the floor. The bathroom light was on. I stared at it, waiting for it to turn off, thinking maybe I had not actually flipped the switch. My hand had. I was sure. I walked back and opened the door. The light was on. The mirror looked normal again. I watched myself carefully. No lag. Everything matched. I stood there for a long time, waiting for it to happen again. It did not. I turned off the light, stepped out, and shut the door again. The line of light disappeared. I lay down on the bed fully dressed. The sheets smelled clean, like they had been washed that morning. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the building. Pipes creaked somewhere. A faint hum came from inside the walls. My heart slowly slowed down. I was just starting to relax when I heard water. At first it was faint, like a drip. Then it was steady. The sound of a faucet running. I sat up in bed. The sound was coming from the bathroom. I had not gone back in. I had not touched the sink. I got up slowly and stood in the main room, barefoot on the cold floor, listening. The water ran for a few seconds, then stopped. Silence returned. I waited. My skin felt tight, like it does before you get sick. I walked to the bathroom door and put my hand on it. The door was cold. I opened it. The sink was dry. The mirror showed my face, pale, eyes wide. No water in the basin. No sound. I checked the shower. Dry. I checked the toilet. Normal. I stood there too long, staring at the mirror, daring it to lag again. It did not. I went back to the bed and sat down. I tried to scroll on my phone to distract myself, but my hands were shaking too much. I kept thinking about cameras, about someone watching, about a feed running through the wall with a delay, about the mirror not being a mirror at all. I imagined someone in another room, somewhere above or beside me, watching my movements a second late, water running when they wanted to test if I was still there. That thought settled in my stomach and stayed. I did not pack calmly. I moved fast and quiet, stuffing my things back into my bag, checking corners, checking vents, checking behind the bathroom mirror with my fingers, even though I knew I could not remove it. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Before leaving, I stood in the main room and looked at the bathroom door one last time. Nothing happened. No light. No sound. I left the key on the table and walked out. The hallway smelled like cleaning solution and old carpet. The elevator took too long. Every reflective surface felt wrong. I avoided looking at them. Outside, the night air felt safer. Cooler. Real. I walked until I found a convenience store with bright lights and a bench outside. I sat there with my bag at my feet, watching people come and go, listening to the automatic doors, grounding myself in the normal sounds of a city that was still awake. I did not go back to the apartment. I stayed on that bench until morning, eyes burning from lack of sleep, watching the sky slowly change color. Later that day, I canceled the rest of my stay. The host refunded me without asking why. No message. No questions. Just the money returned, clean and fast. I did not leave a review. I did not want to explain something I still could not fully explain to myself. But I know what I saw. Reflections do not lag. Water does not run by itself. And clean, quiet places can hide things better than messy ones ever could. I arrived in Edinburgh in October 2021 with a small suitcase and a tired body. The city felt cold in a way that sank into my clothes instead of sitting on the skin. The taxi dropped me off near Leith, on a narrow street lined with old stone buildings that all looked the same in the dark. The Airbnb was a basement flat. I had to walk down a short set of stone steps from the sidewalk to reach the door. The steps were worn smooth in the middle, and there was a damp smell that reminded me of old cellars and wet shoes. I remember thinking it felt practical and cheap, which was exactly what I wanted. Inside, the flat was clean but heavy. The ceiling was low, and the lights were warm but weak, like they were trying their best and failing. There was a small living area with a couch that had been cleaned too many times, a coffee table with scratches, and a tiny kitchen pushed against the wall. A narrow stairwell led up to a raised sleeping area. The stairs were wooden and steep, and they creaked even when I pressed on them with my hand. The bedroom was just a mattress on a frame, a small lamp, and a window that sat at street level, covered by frosted glass. On the coffee table, there was a guestbook. It was a plain notebook with a soft blue cover and bent corners. I picked it up out of boredom while my phone charged. Most of the pages were filled with normal things. Names, dates, little notes about enjoying the city, comments about the location being convenient. Some people drew smiley faces or hearts. The handwriting changed from page to page. Some neat, some rushed, some shaky. It felt comforting, like proof that other people had been here and left without problems. Then I noticed the line. Every few pages, written in different handwriting, was the same sentence. He stands by the stairs at night. It showed up again and again, sometimes alone, sometimes written under a normal entry like it had been added as an afterthought. The ink was different colors. Black pen, blue pen, once even pencil. It was not written dramatically. No exclamation marks. No jokes around it. Just the same sentence. I felt a small laugh leave my nose. I told myself it was some kind of joke that past guests had passed along. Maybe someone heard noises and got scared, and the rest played along. The stairs did look creepy, and the building was old. Old buildings made noise. People imagined things when they were half asleep in a strange place. I put the book back and made myself tea with the electric kettle that whined loudly as it heated. That first night, I went to bed early. I had walked all day and my legs ached. The mattress was firm, and the room was cold even with the small heater turned on. I lay there listening to the usual sounds of a city settling down. Cars passing above, footsteps on the pavement, pipes knocking somewhere in the walls. The stairwell below my bed was dark. The light switch was at the bottom, near the living area, and I did not bother turning it on. I woke up sometime in the night without knowing why. My eyes opened, and for a few seconds I just lay there, trying to place myself. Then I heard it, breathing, slow and steady. Not loud, but close enough that I could hear the wet sound of air moving through a nose. It came from below, from the bottom of the stairs. I held my breath without meaning to. The sound did not stop. It was not the wind. It was not pipes. It had a rhythm. In and out. In and out. I stayed still, staring at the ceiling, counting my breaths in my head to keep from panicking. My phone was on the bedside table, face down. I did not reach for it. The idea of moving felt dangerous, like the sound would notice me if I did. After what felt like a long time, the breathing stopped. There was no sound of footsteps going away. No door opening or closing. Just silence, heavy and thick. I did not sleep again that night. When morning came, the light through the frosted window looked gray and dull. I told myself I had imagined it. I told myself that fear had filled in the gaps. During the day, the flat looked harmless. I went out early and stayed out late. I walked along the water, ate cheap food, kept myself busy. When I came back that evening, I left all the lights on. The stairwell looked normal under the yellow light. Just wood and shadows. Before bed, I checked the locks. The front door was locked. The windows were shut. Everything was as it should be. I went to sleep with the lamp on. At 3 a.m., I woke again. The breathing was back. This time it was closer. I could hear the slight hitch in it, like the person was trying to breathe quietly and failing. My stomach tightened. I listened harder, against my will. I could hear the faint sound of fabric moving, a soft shift of weight. Someone was standing there, at the bottom of the stairs, just out of sight. I stayed still until my muscles hurt. I thought about calling for help, but the idea of making noise felt wrong. I did not know who was there, or what they would do if they knew I was awake. The breathing went on for a long time. Then slowly it moved away. Not up the stairs. Away, deeper into the flat. In the morning, I searched the place. I checked the bathroom, the kitchen, behind the couch. I opened the door that led to a small storage area I had not noticed before. It smelled stale and empty. There was nothing there. No signs of anyone else. No extra shoes. No coat. Nothing. I looked at the guest book again. The sentence stared back at me, repeated across the pages like a warning no one had taken seriously enough. I felt stupid for laughing at it. I felt angry at myself for staying another night. That night, I did not sleep at all. I sat on the bed with my bag packed, the lamp on, my phone in my hand. At some point, I heard movement again, farther away this time, like someone moving carefully. I did not look. I kept my eyes on the door until the light outside the window changed. When morning came, I did not wait. I wrote in the guest book with a shaking hand. I wrote the same sentence, exactly as it appeared on the other pages. He stands by the stairs at night. I closed the book and left it on the table. I left the flat, climbed the stone steps, and stood on the street breathing in cold air until my chest stopped hurting. I did not look back. I checked into a hotel that afternoon and slept for 12 hours straight. Weeks later, safe at home, I read reviews of the place online. Buried among comments about location and price were mentions of strange noises, unease at night, and one review that said the owner sometimes stayed in the building. That was enough. I understood then. It was not a ghost. It was a person who knew the space, who knew when guests slept, who knew where to stand so they could listen without being seen. The guest book was not a joke. It was a record, and I was lucky enough to leave and add my line before I became something else written in that book. The listing said the place only had exterior security cameras. That was one of the reasons I booked it. I was traveling alone, and I did not want to feel watched while sleeping or changing clothes. The photos showed a clean, normal house in a quiet San Diego neighborhood, the kind with low fences, palm trees, and streetlights that buzz softly at night. When I arrived earlier that evening, everything felt ordinary. The air smelled like ocean salt mixed with warm concrete. The house looked lived in but tidy. No strange noises, no weird energy, nothing that set off alarms in my head. I went through my usual routine. I locked the door. I checked the windows. I unpacked slowly, placing my bag against the wall in the bedroom. The bedroom was at the back of the house. The living room was separated by a short hallway. The floors were hardwood, and every step made a quiet but sharp sound. I noticed that right away, because I am a light sleeper. I made mental notes of how sound traveled through the house. If someone walked, I would hear it. Before going to bed, I explored the house. The living room had a couch, a coffee table with old scratches, and a large TV mounted on the wall. Above the TV, I noticed a small black dome in the corner of the ceiling. I assumed it was part of the alarm system. It did not look like a normal camera, but I did not think much of it. The listing said exterior cameras only, and I trusted that. I turned off the lights one by one. The house settled the way houses do at night, with small pops and creaks from cooling wood. I lay in bed scrolling on my phone until my eyes felt heavy. I plugged my phone into the charger and placed it face down on the nightstand. The room was dark except for a thin line of streetlight cutting through the blinds. I remember thinking how quiet everything was. Too quiet, maybe, but I brushed that thought away. At some point, I woke up without knowing why. My eyes opened and my body was still. I did not move. I did not hear anything. The kind of silence that feels thick, like it presses against your ears. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet room. It made my chest tighten instantly. I reached for it slowly, trying not to make noise, even though I was alone. The screen lit up my hand and part of the wall. The notification was from the house's smart system, the one mentioned in the welcome message. It said motion detected in living room. The timestamp read 4:03 a.m. I sat up in bed, completely awake now. I stayed still listening. I heard nothing. No footsteps. No shifting weight. No floor creaks. Nothing. The hallway outside the bedroom door was dark. I could see the faint outline of the door frame. The door itself was closed, just like I had left it. I opened the app. The interface was simple, white background, black text. It showed the same alert again. Motion detected in living room. The time updated to 4:04 a.m. Then 4:05 a.m. I tapped on the camera view, expecting to see a live feed or at least a frozen image. Instead, it said the camera was unavailable. Disabled. The status refreshed every few seconds, like it was trying to connect and failing. My heart started beating faster. I checked the alert history. There were no previous alerts before that night. Just this one repeating. I checked my phone's battery. It was charging. I checked the time again. 4:06 a.m. I stayed in bed for a long time, holding my phone with both hands. I tried to slow my breathing. I told myself it was a glitch. Systems mess up all the time. Motion sensors can be sensitive. Maybe the air conditioner turned on. Maybe a bug. But the house did not have central air, and the windows were closed. And the alert kept coming. Every minute, the timestamp updated. Motion detected in living room. The camera view stayed disabled. I did not hear anything at all. That was the part that bothered me the most. If someone was moving around out there, I should have heard it. The floors were loud. The house was old. Sound traveled easily. I got out of bed slowly. My feet touched the cold floor. I stood there for a full minute, listening, before taking a single step. The hallway felt longer than it had earlier. The darkness seemed thicker. I held my phone in front of me, using the screen as a weak light. I did not turn on any lights. I did not know why. It just felt wrong to do so. I reached the bedroom door and rested my hand on the knob. I paused again. My phone buzzed. Another alert. 4:09 a.m. motion detected in living room. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. The living room was at the end of it, barely visible. I took slow steps forward, placing my feet carefully to avoid making noise. The closer I got, the more aware I became of my own body. My breathing sounded too loud. My heartbeat felt like it was echoing in my head. When I reached the living room, everything looked exactly the same as before. The couch, the table, the TV. Nothing was out of place. No shadows moving. No signs of anyone being there. I stood still, scanning every corner. That was when I noticed the black dome again, above the TV. A small green light was blinking on it. Slowly. Steadily. I checked my phone again. The app refreshed. Motion detected in living room. The timestamp updated while I was standing there, not moving. The realization hit me hard and fast. The system was detecting motion while I was standing completely still. And it had been doing that before I ever left the bedroom. I backed away from the living room and returned to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I pushed a chair under the handle, even though I knew it would not do much. I sat on the bed and did not sleep again. The alerts kept coming until around 5:30 a.m., when they suddenly stopped. No explanation. No final alert saying motion ended. Just silence. In the morning, sunlight filled the room like nothing had happened. The house looked harmless again. I packed my things quickly. Before leaving, I checked the app one last time. The alert history was empty. No record of the night at all. Later that day, I reported what happened through the platform. I described the alerts, the disabled camera view, the repeated motion detection. The response I received explained it away as a system glitch triggered by people moving around at night. I read it slowly, sitting in my car, doors locked, engine off. I had not walked around at night. Not until after the alerts had already been happening for a long time. And the system had known exactly where I was standing when it kept detecting motion in an empty room. I drove away from the house and did not look back. A few days later, I checked the listing again. The description had been updated. It now mentioned interior motion sensors used for security purposes. The black dome was visible in one of the new photos, clearly labeled. The part that stays with me is not the alerts or the blinking light. It is the thought that the system was not malfunctioning at all. It was working exactly as designed. It detected movement because there was movement. And the camera view was disabled because it was never meant for guests to see. I rented the farmhouse because it was cheap and far from everything. I wanted quiet. I wanted long days where nothing happened and long nights where the dark felt empty instead of crowded. The listing said rural Ohio, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by cornfields and woods. The photos showed wide floors, old windows, a porch that sagged just a little. It looked honest. I packed notebooks, a laptop, extra batteries, canned food, and drove until my phone lost signal. The house sat back from the road, down a gravel drive that curved between bare trees. It was late fall. The fields were cut down to brown stubble. The wind moved across them in low waves. When I arrived, the place smelled like dust and old wood, the way abandoned places do even when they are still being used. I did a full walkthrough as soon as I unlocked the door. That is a habit I have. I like to know the shape of where I am staying. The ground floor was simple. Kitchen, living room, a small bathroom, one bedroom. Everything worked. The furniture was older but clean. The walls had nail holes where pictures used to hang. There were no family photos, no personal items, just the basics. The upstairs was locked, which I had been told about. It was storage. I did not care. Then I noticed the basement door. It was at the end of a short hallway near the back door. Solid wood, painted white long ago, chipped around the handle. A thick padlock ran through a metal latch on the outside of the door. The padlock was new compared to the door. It was shiny with no rust. I tugged on it once out of curiosity. It did not move. I remembered the listing mentioning that the basement was off limits. Old foundation, unsafe stairs. That made sense. I moved on. The first day went how I wanted. I wrote for hours. I cooked simple food. As it got dark, the house creaked and popped as it cooled. The wind pushed against the walls. None of that bothered me. I locked the doors, turned on a few lamps, and kept working. Time moved slowly, then faster. At some point I checked the clock and saw it was 9:30 p.m. That was when I noticed the cold. It was not the normal kind of cold you feel when the heat shuts off. It was sharper. It slid across my ankles like water. I stood up from the table and followed it without thinking. The hallway was darker than the rest of the house. One of the bulbs flickered when I flipped the switch. The basement door was no longer fully shut. It stood open a crack, maybe 2 inches. The padlock was gone. I stood there for a long time. I know that because my legs started to ache and my breath slowed. The air coming up from below smelled wrong. Not rot exactly, not mold alone. It smelled like damp clothes that had never dried, mixed with something older. Something like paper and metal and skin. The cold poured out steadily, as if the basement was holding its breath and letting it out through that narrow opening. I did not touch the door. I did not need to. The dark behind it felt thick, not empty. I told myself there was a simple reason. The host must have come by. Maybe the lock had been temporary. Maybe someone needed access. But the house was far from the road. I had not heard a car. The gravel drive was loud. I would have noticed. I closed the door slowly, using just 2 fingers. It resisted for a second, then shut. I leaned my weight against it and slid a chair in front of it. I checked every window. They were locked. I checked the back door. Locked. I checked the front door again. Locked. I slept with the lights on and my phone charging beside me. I slept badly. In the morning, the chair was still where I left it. The door was closed. There was no padlock. I told myself again that it was nothing. That afternoon I contacted the host through the rental app. I described the basement door and the missing lock. Her response came hours later. She said it was strange and that no one was supposed to unlock it anymore. She explained that the basement had been sealed after an issue years ago. She did not give details. She said she would look into it. The word anymore stayed with me. It did not fit. It suggested a habit that had stopped, not a one-time problem. I tried to write, but every sound pulled my attention away. The house no longer felt empty. It felt occupied by something that knew its way around. That night, I did not sit at the table. I stayed on the couch where I could see the hallway. At 9:30 p.m. again, the cold came back. It was stronger this time. The hallway light dimmed on its own. I watched the basement door handle turn just enough to make the latch click. The door opened wider than before. I could see the top of the stairs. They were narrow and steep. The wood was worn down the middle, darker there from years of feet. Something down there shifted. Not a voice. Not a clear sound. More like the scrape of fabric against concrete. I stayed still. My heart beat, so hard I thought it might be loud enough to carry. After a long time, the door closed again. I waited until morning without moving. I left that day. I packed fast. I did not clean. I did not check the basement door. I drove until my phone worked again and contacted the host. I told her everything. She did not reply right away. I checked into a motel and slept with the television on. 2 days later, she sent a long message. She said she had gone to the house with a local sheriff. They found signs of someone living in the basement. A mattress on the floor. Food wrappers. Empty water bottles. Old coats layered on top of each other. A space heater plugged into an extension cord. The basement had a second entrance from outside that had been boarded up from the inside years ago. Someone had reopened it. She said the man had worked on the farm decades earlier and never left the property after it was sold. He had been using the basement on and off, unlocking it when he needed to come up for water or heat. She said the lock had been added recently to keep him out, but he knew how to remove it. She said he was gone now, taken to a hospital. The property would be checked regularly from now on. I did not go back for my things. She mailed what she could find. Some of it never arrived. I do not miss it. I still think about the timing, about how he waited until night, about how he stopped unlocking it anymore. I think about how close I was to opening that door myself, just to understand. The cold air still comes back to me sometimes when I am alone at night. It reminds me that some places are not empty just because they look that way, and that locks are only useful if the person on the other side agrees to them. I arrived in Lisbon late in the evening, tired in a way that sits behind the eyes and makes every light feel too bright. The plane landed just after 9, and by the time I got my bag and found a taxi, the city felt quiet but not asleep. Street lights reflected on the pavement like thin lines of water. The air smelled like stone and old buildings that had held heat all day. I remember checking my phone when the car stopped in front of the apartment. It was 10:08 p.m. The building looked normal, narrow and tall, with pale walls and small balconies stacked above each other. Nothing about it stood out. The host met me at the door downstairs. He smiled, took my bag without asking, and spoke in English with a soft accent. He told me welcome back. I assumed it was a joke or a mistake. I had never been to Portugal before. I told him that, and he looked at me for a second longer than normal. His smile slipped just a little, then came back. He laughed like it was nothing, like he had mixed me up with someone else. We went up the stairs, past chipped steps and a metal railing worn smooth in places. The building smelled like dust and cleaning soap. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. Inside, everything was neat and carefully arranged. Too careful. The couch cushions were straight, the table had nothing on it except a small bowl with keys inside, and the walls were almost empty. The lights were warm and low. He showed me the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. I nodded and thanked him. He left a few minutes later, saying he lived nearby if I needed anything. I locked the door behind him and stood still listening. I could hear a TV somewhere in the building and the distant sound of cars. I unpacked slowly. My clothes felt wrinkled and foreign after the long trip. The bed was already made, sheets tucked tight. I showered and let the hot water run longer than needed. When I finally lay down, my body felt heavy. I remember checking my phone again before sleeping. 10:11 p.m. A message came in from an unknown number. It said, "Did you sleep better this time, Daniel?" I stared at the screen for a long time. The name hit me first. Daniel. That is not my name. I checked the booking app to make sure I hadn't somehow entered the wrong information. My profile was correct. My name was correct. I thought maybe the host had copied and pasted the message from another guest by mistake. I replied and corrected him. I kept it short and polite. The message showed as delivered. No reply came back. I lay awake longer than I expected. The apartment made small sounds as it cooled. Pipes clicked. Somewhere a door closed. I told myself it was nothing. People make mistakes. I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, light came in through thin curtains. I woke up disoriented, not sure where I was for a few seconds. The room looked the same as the night before, clean and plain. I checked my phone. No new messages. I got dressed and went to make coffee. The kitchen window looked out over a narrow street. A bakery across the way was opening. The smell of bread drifted up. After breakfast, I decided to explore the apartment a bit more. Not because I was suspicious, but because I was curious. I had time before heading out, and the place felt strangely impersonal, like a hotel pretending to be a home. There was a short hallway between the bedroom and the front door. I hadn't paid much attention to it before. On one wall, there were several framed photos. I assumed they were decorations, maybe of the city or landscapes. I stopped when I really looked at them. The first few were of Lisbon streets, old trams, rooftops at sunset. Then I reached the last one. It was a portrait of a man standing against a plain wall. He was looking straight at the camera. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Then my stomach tightened. The man in the photo looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same dark hair cut short on the sides. Even the same scar on the chin, a thin white line from when I fell as a kid. The angle of the face, the shape of the nose, the way the eyes sat in the sockets. It wasn't just similar. It was precise. The clothes were different, and the photo looked a few years old, but there was no doubt. It was my face. I stepped closer. The frame was clean, no dust. It had been wiped recently. The photo itself was high quality, printed on thick paper. I turned it over, expecting maybe a name or a date. The back was blank. I felt exposed standing there, like someone was watching me through the walls. I walked through the rest of the apartment again, slower this time. I opened closets. They were empty except for hangers. I checked drawers. Nothing personal. No mail, no notes. It was like the apartment reset itself between guests. I sat on the couch and tried to think clearly. There were a few possibilities. One was that this was some kind of strange coincidence. Another was that someone who looked like me had stayed here before. But the scar made that hard to accept. Scars are personal. They come from specific moments. I thought about the message again. Did you sleep better this time, Daniel? Better this time meant there was a last time. Someone had stayed here before. Someone the host knew well enough to check on their sleep. Someone who looked like me and was called Daniel. I went back to the booking app and looked at the listing photos. The hallway was visible in one picture, but the wall with the frames was cropped out. I searched the host's name online. It was common. Nothing useful came up. I didn't leave the apartment that day. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I did, something would change while I was gone. Instead, I paid attention to sounds outside the door. Footsteps passed. Voices echoed up the stairwell. At one point, I thought I heard someone stop outside my door, but when I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. In the afternoon, I noticed something else. The keys in the bowl by the door included one key that wasn't for the apartment. It was older, scratched, with a small faded tag attached. On the tag, written in pen, was the name Daniel. That was when it stopped feeling like a mistake. I packed my bag with shaking hands. I took photos of the framed picture, the key, the message on my phone. I left the apartment before evening, locking the door behind me. I didn't tell the host I was leaving. I checked into a hotel near the airport instead. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the same thought. Someone who looked like me had been here. Someone who shared my face, my scar. Someone who had stayed long enough to be remembered, long enough to have a photo hung on the wall. The host had greeted me like I was him because, to him, I was. The next morning, I did some searching. Reverse image searches. Forums. It took hours, but I found something. A post from 2 years earlier on a travel site. A man named Daniel had written about living in Lisbon for a few months, working remotely, staying in a small apartment with a friendly host. He mentioned feeling like the city fit him too well, like he had been there before. His profile picture stopped me cold. It was my face. The post ended abruptly. No updates. No goodbye. I didn't stay in Portugal. I flew home that day. I reported the listing, but it was taken down before anyone replied. The host's profile disappeared. The ending is clear to me now. Someone with my exact face lived a version of my life before me. He stayed too long in a place that treated him like he belonged there. When I arrived, I wasn't a new guest. I was a replacement. I was stepping into a space that had already been shaped for someone else who looked just like me. Leaving broke whatever pattern that was forming. Staying would have meant letting that identity close around me, slowly and quietly, until my own name stopped fitting. I was staying alone in a small rental house outside a quiet town in Montana. It was the kind of place people book to get away from noise, from other people, from cell service that works too well. Pine trees surrounded the property on all sides, thick and close, and the gravel road leading to the house ended there. No neighbors that I could see. Just trees, wind, and a sky that felt too big at night. I had arrived late the evening before. The air was cold enough to sting my nose, even in early fall. Inside, the house smelled clean but old, like dust that had been wiped away instead of washed. The furniture was heavy and dark, the kind meant to last decades. Everything worked, though. The lights, the heater, the locks. I checked the doors twice before going to bed, more out of habit than fear. The bedroom was at the back of the house. One window faced the trees. It had thin white curtains that didn't fully close. I noticed the window because the air felt colder near it, but it was locked. I remember checking it with my hand, pressing up and then pulling down, making sure it wouldn't slide. I did not open it. I am certain of that. I don't sleep with windows open, especially in places like that. I went to sleep around midnight. The house made normal sounds. Wood settling. Wind moving through branches. Nothing that stood out. I slept deeply, no dreams that I can remember. My phone vibrated on the nightstand at 5 a.m. sharp. The sound felt loud in the quiet room. I woke up confused, my heart already beating faster, because no one ever messages me that early, especially not on a trip like that. The sky outside the window was still dark, just a faint gray line at the horizon. The message was from the rental service. It said I had checkout instructions. That didn't make sense. Checkout wasn't until noon. I read the message slowly, still half asleep. It listed normal things. Where to leave the keys. How to handle the trash. Then the last line told me to make sure the bedroom window was closed this time. That line fully woke me up. I read it again. I sat up in bed. My body felt cold, like the heater had shut off, but it hadn't. I kept thinking about the words this time. I hadn't opened the window. There was no reason for anyone to think I had. There was no earlier message about it. No warning. Nothing. I turned my head toward the window. The curtain was moving. At first I thought it was the heater pushing air, but the movement was uneven. I reached out and pulled the curtain back. The window was wide open. Cold air poured into the room. The smell of wet soil and pine filled my nose. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. I just stared at it for a few seconds, my mind trying to catch up with what I was seeing. I got out of bed slowly. The floor was freezing under my feet. I walked closer, every step careful, like the room might change if I moved too fast. The window frame was scratched. Not badly, but enough that I noticed it. Then I saw the marks on the glass. Fingerprints. They were smeared, not clean. The kind left by skin, not gloves. And they were on the outside of the window. I leaned closer, my face inches from the glass. There were more than one set. Some higher up, like someone had pressed their hands flat to look inside. One print was lower, near the latch. The latch that had been locked when I went to sleep. My stomach turned. I felt dizzy. My ears started ringing, and for a moment I thought I might throw up. I wiped my hands on my shirt, because they were suddenly slick with sweat. I closed the window as quietly as I could. The metal latch clicked into place, loud in the silence. I pulled the curtains shut and backed away until my legs hit the bed. I didn't know how long I sat there. Time felt wrong. My phone screen was still lit from the message. 5:07 a.m. I checked the rest of the house with a kitchen knife in my hand. I moved slowly, checking every room, every corner, every door. Nothing was out of place. No signs of someone inside. The doors were still locked. No broken glass. No footprints on the floor. But outside the bedroom window, in the dirt below, I could see the ground had been disturbed. Leaves pushed aside. Mud pressed down in the shape of shoes. Someone had stood there. Long enough to leave marks. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until daylight, every sound making my muscles tighten. When the sun finally came up, the house looked normal again. Almost harmless. But the fingerprints were still there, clear as before. I took pictures of everything. The window. The prints. The ground outside. My phone showed the time and date in the corner. I packed my bag with shaking hands. I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I just wanted to leave. Before I did, I checked the rental listing again. I noticed something I hadn't before. The host's name was different from the name on the message. The account had been updated recently. The reviews mentioned how private the place was, how secluded, how quiet. One review talked about the bedroom window sticking sometimes. Another mentioned strange early messages about house rules. I drove straight into town and went to the local sheriff's office. I showed them the photos. I showed them the message. I explained everything in order, from when I arrived to when I found the window open. They took it seriously. They told me there had been issues before with that property. Nothing supernatural. Just a man who used to own the land and refused to let go of it. He still had keys to older locks. He watched the place. Sometimes he checked windows. They said the rental company had been trying to deal with it quietly. That part stayed with me. Quietly. The message I received wasn't a mistake. It wasn't automated. Someone had been watching the house close enough to know which room I slept in. Close enough to know the window had been open. Close enough to touch the glass and leave their hands there. I left Montana that day. I didn't wait until noon. I didn't stay another night. Weeks later, the rental listing was gone. The property disappeared from the site like it had never been there. But I still think about that message being sent at 5 a.m. I think about someone standing in the trees, checking their phone, looking at the house, knowing the window was open before I did.